And although entering politics relatively late in his career, Vince Cable went on to become one of the most influential politicians of his generation. Not bad for a Liberal Democrat who, prior to 2010, were at best the party of protest. But all of that changed with the coalition agreement between then Prime Minister David Cameron and Lib Dem leader Nick Clegg. Vince Cable was one of the most high-profile figures in that administration, serving as business secretary from 2010 to 2015, where he oversaw major progressive changes to the world of business, to the economy and our tax system. But of course, he also signed up for the controversial policy of austerity. Vince Cable was the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He was the MP for Twickenham and was the Lib Dems' chief economic spokesperson from 2003 to 2010, having previously served as chief economist for Shell in the mid-90s. Famously, he predicted the credit crunch years before it happened, and Vince Cable has often been on the right side of history, and I'm delighted to say he joins me now. Sir Vince, welcome to GB News.
Thank you for your welcome.
So are you glad you entered politics? Was it worth it, all that trouble and no money?
Yeah, it was worth it. It was trouble, a lot of sleepless nights, some bad calls. But yeah, it was worth it. And I always tell young people that, politics and politicians are basically good. There are some bad eggs. There are some bad decisions, but it's a good thing to do. It's a way of serving the country, and I'm glad I did it.
And I say no money. Clearly, it's not. It's quite a lot of money that politicians get paid, especially cabinet ministers like yourself. But it's not the kind of cash you would have made in industry if you'd stayed out of politics.
No, that's right. I mean, you don't do it for the money. Well, a few people may do that. No, you don't. You don't basically do it for the money. And for those of us who are lucky enough to have serious jobs in the private sector, there was that alternative. But no, I think going into public service is a good thing to have done, and I would hope more people do it.
Tell me about your early years, your schooling years, your family background. Did they influence your politics?
Yeah, not in a charitable way, really. I was grammar school boy. My parents were initially factory workers, but they were ambitious, hardworking. They worked their way up in society, and eventually became fairly solidly middle class. So, and my dad in particular was, very right wing, very conservative. You're talking about Churchill. Churchill was one of my dad's great heroes. And we used to argue about politics. So I suppose I learned from him and my parents about, debating, arguing. But, I owe them a lot. And, and I'm grateful for the upbringing I had, despite, the disagreements.
Large L or a small L. Have you always been a liberal at heart, Vince?
Broadly, I suppose if you're trying to attach labels, I would say I was broadly kind of centre-left. I mean, I was never a wild lefty, but I was always a bit left of centre. And as you know, I started getting involved in politics in the Labour Party, initially in Glasgow in the 70s. But I've been broadly around the same position. I mean, the problem is that British politics has been convulsed by these, various civil wars and in the Labour Party in the late 70s. I was with some, very fine people. I worked with John Smith, who was leader of the Labour Party, a great guy, and there were people like that. But the hard left took over, and I went off to the SDP and the Liberal Democrats.
And, of course, it continues to this day. You became the leader of that party. That must have been a great moment for you.
Yes, it was also a challenge. We'd had two terrible general elections, and it was, picking us up from the floor. And, I was there 2 years, and we made good progress and had spectacular local government results and got up to 20% in the polls, did very well in those Euro elections. But, I was a transitional figure and handed over. And unfortunately, the next general election didn't work out well either. But, I think in the long run, there is an important voice that the Liberal Democrats articulate. I think the country will, turn to us in larger numbers when disillusionment with the government sets in.
Yes, well, let's talk about your years in power. What a sentence for a Liberal Democrat politician. I mean, that was the great achievement for the Lib Dems of the coalition agreement of 5 years of power, was actually dictating the agenda, shaping policy, rather than arguing on the sidelines.
Yes, and actually, to some extent, the coalition is being currently airbrushed out of history. It sounds a long time ago now, but actually, it was, I think, a very good government. We did a lot of stuff. We argued and sometimes argued publicly, but when we came to a decision, we stuck to it and we implemented it. And I think most of the civil servants, the people who were working with, thought it was one of the best governments they'd encounter. Of course, since then, very little has happened. We had all the Brexit stuff and everything that's flowed from it, and the country wasn't able to move forward. But those 5 years were, in many ways, very productive. And I certainly, in my neck of the woods, we did important things in supporting British industry, the industrial strategy, the business bank, the green bank. Supporting the car industry, the aerospace industry, and a lot of social legislation, shared parental leave, and the rest of it. No, I thought it was a very productive period of government.
And of course, raising the tax threshold for low-paid workers was a big one too.
The Lib Dems made a contribution in several issues that probably wouldn't otherwise have happened. One of them was lifting the tax threshold, which was particularly helpful to low earners. The pupil premium, again, helped disadvantaged kids at school. Yeah, I mean, we did a whole lot of things, pushing renewable energy, which, of course, has borne fruit with the offshore wind revolution. Yeah, the Lib Dems had a lot to be proud of, but, of course, all of that is now described as, quote, conservative. But, we did it.
Now, clearly, you wouldn't want to be in power in 2010, probably just as you wouldn't want to have been in power in 2020-21, but it was over a decade ago that we were at the tail end of the credit crunch, the global financial crisis, the downturn. And I think at its worst, the deficit, which obviously defines the fact that you're spending more than comes in, was running at something like 10% as a share of GDP. And I think towards the tail end of that administration, it was closer to 2%. However, it was done with a policy of austerity. Now, was austerity a mistake or just missold to the British public?
It was right to have fiscal discipline, and indeed we inherited the darling plan from the outgoing Labour government, which involved reducing that deficit over a 7-year period to nothing. So, we did what had to be done, and it wasn't easy, and we all had to swallow big cuts in our departments, but it had to be done. Now, we can argue about whether there should have been a bit more taxation and less cut in public spending, and I would have argued that. I did argue it in government, that we could have had more public investment, but basically the strategy of having fiscal discipline, budget discipline, was necessary and right.
What do you think we should do this time round, given the fact that the deficit was a fraction then of what it is now?
It's not such a difficult problem in some ways. I mean, although there's a bigger volume of public debt after the pandemic, it's less of a problem than it was in 2010 for the very simple reason that interest rates are close to zero, so the cost of servicing the debt is very, very low. And it can therefore be done in a much more gradual way. I would, be honest with the public and just say that, look, we're going to have to pay a bit more tax. And of course, the government did that the other day with national insurance. That may not have been the best way to do it. But, I think if everybody accepted that in order to get the public finances back into a sensible position, there is going to have to be an increased tax. And at the same time, the government can't afford to throw money at everything. Then that's the message that has to come across. But there's no easy way out of it.
So would you actually have backed this raising of national insurance, or would you have found other measures with which to pay for social care and to support the NHS and to tackle the deficit?
I would have found other measures. I mean, there was a problem that had to be dealt with. The social care system is desperately overstretched, and social care workers, there aren't enough of them, and they're don't have great conditions. Something had to be done. I would have spread the tax burden more fairly, but I would have accepted the need to raise taxation. And actually, there were some perfectly sensible ideas coming from people who were on the opposite end of the political spectrum. I was listening to people like John Redwood and Peter Lilly, who were saying that the particular issue of people having to sell their houses and families not being able to inherit, that's not a problem for the taxpayer. That should primarily be dealt with through the insurance system. And letting the insurance companies take a charge on property so that people are not forced into difficult personal decisions. But yeah, I mean, something had to be done, and the government did it. I think they chose the wrong tax and some of the wrong techniques, but there's no easy way around these things.
What about ditching the triple lock on pensions?
I don't think, maybe you can correct me, but I get a sense that it's been suspended rather than ditched. I mean, the principle
It strikes me as a fudge.
Yes, I mean, there's a real problem, of course, is that, earnings would have otherwise gone up by, 8% a year. There'd have been a massive windfall for pensioners while working people are being squeezed. That wouldn't have been acceptable. So they had to do something. But as I understand it, the principle of protecting the basic state pension has been maintained, and that they've temporarily, dropped the windfall, and I think that was the right thing to do.
Lots of questions coming in, Sir Vince. Darren on Twitter. Thank you, Darren, for your tweet. Why does it appear to many that the Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems have all merged into a single party that no one would vote for?
Well, I'm not sure that I would accept that. I mean, we have very, very big differences with the Tories, notably over Brexit, as you know very well.
Of course.
We couldn't work with the Labour Party when Mr Corbyn and these people were in charge. There were sort of massive differences between the parties. It's become a bit closer, that the government is making a few gestures toward a more one nation approach, and dealing with some of the problems of the north of England, and the Labour Party has become less extreme. So there is some convergence, if you like, a bit more consensus, but there are still big divisions.
Well, yes, I mean, I wouldn't want to second-guess what my good friend Darren was getting at with his question on Twitter, but I might speculate that he's talking possibly about the pandemic strategy. Now, in my opinion, the Lib Dems have been absolutely right to argue against COVID passports. It doesn't make scientific sense. It's very damaging to society. And I salute the Lib Dems for speaking up against it, particularly Alan Carmichael in the shadow cabinet of the Lib Dems. Alistair, forgive me, thank you so much, Alistair Carmichael. But more or less, the Lib Dems have supported these national lockdowns, which have produced a lot of economic damage, a lot of societal damage as well. Do you regret that the Lib Dems were not a little more liberal when it comes to the handling of the pandemic, perhaps taking a more Swedish approach?
Well, I argued in my column in The Independent for more of a Swedish approach, as it happens. But I don't actually agree with you or my colleagues, or former colleagues, on the vaccine passport. I mean, I think there is a strong argument for, in the case of public events, of having people who've been properly double vaccinated, because it's not just an issue of personal choice. You're a great liberal.
You're a liberal, Sir Vince. How can you possibly sign up to that awful state intervention?
I also take the view that we have to be concerned about fellow citizens and that we have a social responsibility. So, I mean, I think in the case of the lockdown, it was, I'm not objecting in principle. It's a question of balance. And as you rightly say, there were costs associated with the economy, young people, mental health. I would probably have leaned a bit more in a liberal direction, but I've never disputed the principle that we had to have quite severe measures. We haven't, Britain has not had anything like the kind of draconian measures that they had in France, where you had to get a permit to leave your own home. I mean, we're not remotely in that territory.
Briefly, do you back the Prime Minister's decision to lift restrictions on the 19th of July, Freedom Day? It was described as reckless by the Leader of the Opposition. Do you think Freedom Day was the right thing to do?
Yes, it does. And I think, that we may have to have some continuing measures. I have no problems about mask wearing. I think, that's the kind of sensible precautionary measure we have to have, social distancing. I think we've been through enough of this now over 18 months, 2 years, that most people have got the message and will do it. We should, as far as possible, get people to do this voluntarily rather than through coercion. But yeah, I mean, the lifting of the restrictions was a necessary step, and the fact that we've had the mass vaccination and that's been such a success, in a way justifies what's happened. And I think we're in a much happier position than countries like Australia and New Zealand that have adopted this strategy of simply trying to stamp out the disease and keeping everybody locked at home until every single case is gone, which is proved to be totally the wrong approach.
I couldn't agree with you more. We'll power through some more of these whilst we have you, Sir Vince, for the next couple of minutes. Sean on Twitter. Sean, thank you for your tweet. Cressida Dick has had an extension to her job for another 2 years. What positives has she brought to the job, the police on the street, and lastly, the people being policed themselves? What do you rate Cressida Dick?
Yes, I do. I mean, I saw quite a lot of her in action, and she struck me as being a very good leader. I mean, there are bad things that have happened on her watch, which she's not necessarily responsible for. No, she's a sort of high-quality police officer. So I think, attacking her personally, I don't go along with that.
Tony on Twitter has asked the following, and he's not pulling his punches, Sir Vince. Have you finally accepted Brexit?
Well, it's a reality, of course, but what it hasn't solved is our long-term relationship with the European Economic Union. I mean, at the moment there's denial. The fact is our future is very much locked into our relationship with the rest of the European Union. We're going to have to have a much more satisfactory relationship than we have. Of course, Brexit has happened; it's a fact of life, and I think most people accept that now. But I think a closer trading relationship, more on the Norwegian lines, I think that's going to emerge over a period of years.
Sir Vince, I do consider you to be a very, very wise politician. I think your political judgment is pretty on the money very often. And I think you felt that the Lib Dem leadership, after you ceased to be the leader, went a bit too far, going into the last election, talking about essentially tearing up the withdrawal agreement and going about re-entering the European Union. So do you think that the Lib Dems have got to move on from Brexit now in order to be taken seriously and to be successful in their next chapter?
Well, I think they have moved on. But as I said a few minutes ago, I think the question of redefining our relationship with Europe and having a close relationship, which doesn't involve simply going back, is something. Well, the Labour Party aren't addressing the issue at all. They're just not talking about it. So one serious opposition party is going to do that. And I think the Lib Dems are in a very good position to do it. I think the reason we did very badly in the general election, and we did, but was I think, wasn't primarily because of the position taken up on Brexit. It was because, a lot of, liberal-minded conservatives, middle-of-the-road conservatives, faced with a choice between the greater evil of Brexit or Jeremy Corbyn, thought Jeremy Corbyn was the bigger problem. They switched to voting Conservative. So that was the experience we had in many parts of the country.
Two really quick ones. Do you feel, Sir Vince, that you sold the post office off too cheaply?
No, and indeed we had an investigation subsequently by a senior former Labour minister, actually, who investigated it. If you look at the trajectory of the price of the Royal Mail, I mean, it went down to under £3 at one point. I mean, there was a big bubble, an inflationary bubble for a year or so, but it settled down. And actually, there was a basic common sense behind it. I mean, the Royal Mail was in terrible long-term trouble because of email. I mean, it was destroying its main business, and they had to be able to borrow in order to invest. And you can't borrow if you're part of the government because that gets caught out with all of the other calls on government money. So we had to give them the freedom to operate in the market, and they did it. And I think, 5 or 6 years on, people have recognised that it has had considerable advantages. And the postal workers, of course, we made sure they had a stake in the shareholding. So I think it was difficult at the time. I got a lot of flack. but I think in retrospect, it was turning out to be a sensible move.
Now, finally, Sir Vince, brace yourself for the toughest question of all tonight. It's from Emma on email. Emma, thank you for your email. Sir Vince, would you ever go on Strictly?
I did. I've been on, actually. You may have forgotten.
Oh,
Maybe
no,
too
you
young.
did Strictly.
But it was at Christmas. It wasn't the full Monty. But I went to the edition back in 2010, I think it was, and I got a 10 from Len. It was a proud
A 10
moment.
from Len. Oh, we stand corrected. Well, it was obviously a blink and you'll miss it performance, but was it a good experience? And would you do any other reality shows? Would you go into the jungle?
It was a very tough experience. No, I have no interest in going into the jungle. But, Strictly was wonderful. I had, a great partner was Erin Bogue. And they were great people. And Bruce Forsyth, the rest of them, they were lovely people. And it was a really memorable and positive thing to have done.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.